Surprise visit. Off-duty royal guard on duty guards. Jameson had never liked mornings, but today was different. The sun had just begun to peek over the rooftops of the city, casting long golden streaks along the cobblestone streets. He walked slowly, hands in his pockets, taking in the gentle sounds of the waking city. The chatter of street vendors setting up their stalls, the distant clatter of a blacksmith's hammer, and the soft whinny of horses being led to their stables. Today was his day off, a rare and precious gift in his line of work. Normally, his life revolved around strict schedules, endless drills, and a constant awareness of danger. But today, for the first time in weeks, he could move freely without anyone expecting him to stand rigid, alert, and ready at a moment's notice. Despite the rare freedom, Jameson couldn't fully shake off the sense of alertness that had been ingrained in him through years of training. His posture was relaxed, yet there was a subtle stiffness in the way he carried himself, a muscle memory from his days patrolling the palace. His eyes scanned the streets instinctively, noticing every shadow, every sudden movement, and every stranger that passed by. Though he was off duty, his instincts refused to take a break. Jameson decided to wander toward the market district, a place he rarely had time to visit. He loved watching the variety of people and listening to their conversations, not just for enjoyment, but as a way to observe the world beyond the palace walls. There was something grounding about seeing life continue outside the fortress-like confines of the royal grounds. Children ran past with handmade toys, their laughter echoing in the morning air. Shopkeepers called out to passers-by, advertising fresh bread, colorful fabrics, and exotic spices. Even from a distance, Jameson could smell the scent of warm pastries and roasting coffee beans. He smiled faintly. This ordinary life was a luxury he seldom experienced. As he walked, he noticed a group of street performers setting up in a small square. They juggled brightly painted balls and twirled batons with impressive skill. Jameson paused to watch, leaning casually against a lamp post. For a few minutes, he allowed himself to simply enjoy the scene, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease. The performers' movements were graceful, almost magical, and he found himself clapping along with the small crowd that had gathered. Watching these performers reminded him of a truth he often forgot. Bravery didn't always mean defending a palace or facing danger head-on. Sometimes courage was simply stepping into the world, enjoying it, and being fully present. As Jameson turned away from the performers, he noticed a small, quiet alleyway leading off the main street. Something about it caught his attention, not danger but curiosity. He knew better than to ignore his instincts, and yet the alley seemed harmless, almost inviting. He stepped inside, the sounds of the bustling market fading behind him. The alley was narrow, lined with brick buildings, their walls covered in ivy and colorful murals. The morning sunlight barely reached the ground, creating a pattern of light and shadow that danced as he walked. Halfway down the alley, Jameson spotted an elderly man struggling to carry a bundle of firewood. Without hesitation, Jameson approached him and offered a hand. The man looked up, surprised, but then smiled gratefully as Jameson lifted the heavy bundle with ease. "Thank you, young man," the man said, his voice warm but tired. "These old bones aren't what they used to be." Jameson nodded, setting the bundle down gently. "No trouble at all. It's a good morning for a bit of exercise." The man chuckled, shaking his head. "Exercise indeed. You are strong for your age." They shared a brief laugh, and then Jameson continued on his way, feeling the quiet satisfaction of having helped someone, even in such a small way. The alley opened up into a small courtyard, where a fountain gurgled softly in the morning light. Jameson paused again, enjoying the peaceful moment. He often spent his days thinking about duty, about the constant vigilance required to protect the palace and its people. But here, in this quiet courtyard, he allowed himself a few moments of stillness. He took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill his lungs, and for a moment he imagined a life where days off weren't rare treasures but everyday occurrences. A life where he could wander freely, watch the city wake up, and help people in little meaningful ways. As he lingered by the fountain, Jameson couldn't help but think about his fellow guards back at the palace. They were probably going through their routine inspections, checking the gates and patrolling the corridors, unaware that he was outside, blending in with the ordinary citizens. It was strange to think about the palace without him, even for a day. He had grown so accustomed to its rhythms, its walls, and its people that being away felt almost unreal. And yet, this brief escape reminded him why he had chosen this path in the first place. Protecting the palace wasn't just about standing guard. It was about ensuring that life outside those walls could continue safely and peacefully. After a few more minutes, Jameson decided it was time to head toward the cafe he had spotted earlier. He liked the smell of freshly brewed coffee and the warmth of the place, which seemed to invite conversation and quiet reflection. As he walked, he noticed children chasing a stray cat down the street, their laughter ringing out. He smiled again, feeling a sense of connection to the city, to the ordinary lives that carried on beyond the palace gates. Even for someone trained to expect danger at every turn, there was beauty in the simplicity of these moments. At the cafe, Jameson ordered a cup of coffee and a warm pastry. He took a seat by the window, watching people go about their day. A mother soothed her crying child, a young couple walked hand in hand, and an elderly man read a newspaper with quiet concentration. For the first time in a long while, Jameson felt truly present, not thinking about duty, drills, or danger. He savored the taste of the coffee and the sweetness of the pastry, feeling a rare sense of normalcy wash over him. But even in this peaceful moment, Jameson couldn't entirely escape his training. His eyes scanned the street outside, noting every unusual movement, every stranger who seemed out of place. He couldn't help it. Years of guarding the palace had taught him that danger could appear anywhere at any time. And yet, today felt different. Today, he allowed himself to hope that nothing would go wrong, that the day could remain calm, simple, and ordinary. Just as he was finishing his pastry, a sudden sound caught his attention, a clatter of metal on the street outside. Jameson's instincts kicked in immediately. He turned his head, alert, and saw a small commotion near the market entrance. A cart had tipped over, spilling its contents, and a few people were struggling to help. Relief washed over him, followed by a quiet smile. Nothing serious, just a small accident. Yet even this minor disturbance reminded him that life was full of unexpected moments, and sometimes one needed to be ready to act, even on a day off. Jameson finished his coffee and stepped outside once more. The city was fully awake now, the morning sun warming the streets and buildings. He walked slowly, savoring the sights and sounds, knowing that this rare day off would soon come to an end. Duty would call, as it always did, and he would return to the palace, to the strict routines and constant vigilance that defined his life. But for now, he allowed himself to enjoy the freedom, the ordinary beauty of the city, and the small acts of kindness that made life meaningful. As Jameson walked back toward the palace, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Today's quiet moments, the laughter of children, the aroma of coffee, and the small acts of help he had offered reminded him why he had chosen this path. Being a royal guard wasn't just about standing at attention or defending the palace walls. It was about being part of a larger world, understanding the lives of the people he protected, and finding meaning even in the small, seemingly ordinary moments. By the time Jameson reached the palace gates, the sun was high in the sky, casting a warm glow over the stone walls. The routine guards were busy with their duties, and life inside the palace seemed unchanged. Jameson took a deep breath, feeling the familiar weight of his uniform settle on his shoulders. Today had been a rare escape, a brief taste of freedom and ordinary life, But now it was time to return to the world he knew best, a world of duty, vigilance, and quiet heroism. Even as he passed through the gates and joined the ranks of the on-duty guards, a small part of him remained outside, in the streets and alleys of the city he had wandered that morning. And that part, he knew, would carry him through the long hours ahead, reminding him that courage and kindness existed not just within the palace walls, but in every corner of the world he had sworn to protect. Jameson had barely settled back into the familiar rhythm of the palace when a subtle tension in the air caught his attention. He had just passed through the main gates, nodding briefly to a few on-duty guards he recognized, when a sharp noise echoed from the inner courtyard. It was faint, almost like a metal clang against stone, but in his trained ears it sounded like an alarm bell. He paused mid-step, scanning the corridors and archways with practiced vigilance. Something was unusual. Inside the palace, the on-duty guards were carrying out their standard morning checks. They walked along the stone halls, polished to a soft shine, inspecting the gates and ensuring every corridor was secure. Their movements were deliberate, almost mechanical, the result of years of strict training and rigid routines. But even the most disciplined routines could not prepare them for the unexpected, and today, something was stirring that none of them had anticipated. Jameson's instincts told him to move faster, but he forced himself to remain calm. He did not want to alarm the guards unnecessarily, but he also knew that hesitation could allow a small incident to grow into a real problem. Quietly, he slipped into a side corridor, keeping to the shadows, his eyes flicking from one hallway to another. The palace was alive with activity, servants carrying trays of food, maintenance staff checking the lanterns, and other guards performing their routine patrols. Yet, even amid the normal bustle, there was a subtle ripple of tension. Something felt off. He reached the main courtyard and saw the source of the commotion. A cart had tipped over near one of the side gates, spilling its cargo across the stone floor. Barrels rolled in different directions, and a few frightened pigeons fluttered away, cooing loudly. Several palace staff scrambled to pick up the scattered goods, while one of the on-duty guards barked orders at the workers to clear the area quickly. The situation seemed minor, almost trivial, but Jameson's trained eye noticed something others did not. One of the barrels had a small, unfamiliar insignia, one that Jameson had only ever seen in confidential palace reports. It was not dangerous on its own, but the presence of an unknown symbol in a location like this was unusual. He knelt down subtly, inspecting the crate without drawing attention. Inside, there were some ordinary supplies, yet the arrangement of the items suggested someone had been deliberately trying to distract the guards or test their vigilance. He straightened up and moved closer to the on-duty guard, keeping a casual pace. "Everything all right here?" he asked, his voice calm but authoritative. The guard turned, slightly startled by the sudden question. "Yes, sir, just a small accident with the cart." "Nothing serious." Jameson nodded, but he did not step away. Instead, he observed the movements of the guards and staff, noting how each person reacted under pressure. The spilled cart could have been a simple accident, yet the nervous glances of the workers hinted at something more. Jameson decided to take a closer look at the surrounding area. The palace had multiple entrances, each carefully monitored, but this side gate was less frequently checked. As he approached, he noticed a shadow moving near one of the archways. His heart rate quickened slightly, not with fear but with the familiar rush of alertness. He crouched behind a stone pillar, watching silently. A figure appeared briefly, glancing around as if searching for someone. The person was dressed in simple clothing, blending with the staff, but the cautious, deliberate movements betrayed a level of training Jameson recognized instantly. He quickly realized that this was not an ordinary palace visitor or a careless worker. Someone was testing the guards, observing how they reacted. Jameson's mind raced as he considered the possibilities. It was rare for palace security to be probed in this way, but it had happened before. Small, almost imperceptible acts designed to find weaknesses. The thought made him tighten his jaw. He knew he could not confront the person outright without revealing his presence, but he also could not ignore the warning signs. Meanwhile, inside the palace, the on-duty guards began discussing the incident among themselves. "Probably just a delivery gone wrong," one of them said, though his voice lacked certainty. Another added, "Yes, but still, why would a cart tip over so close to the side gate? Seems careless." Their conversation was ordinary, but Jameson could sense their unease. The routine of the morning had been disrupted, and even minor irregularities could trigger a chain reaction of mistakes. Deciding to act, Jameson moved quietly through the shadows, keeping his eyes on the suspicious figure. He followed at a safe distance, careful not to be seen. The figure paused near a small storage room, appearing to check something inside. Jameson crouched behind a nearby pillar and observed carefully. The person was attempting to gather information without drawing attention, a skill that required precision and subtlety. Jameson recognized the same careful, measured movements from his own training. Whoever this was, they were capable, deliberate, and dangerous if underestimated. From his vantage point, Jameson could see the on-duty guards beginning to return to their patrols, seemingly unaware of the figure's presence. He knew he needed to intervene subtly, without causing panic or confusion. Drawing on his training, he planned his approach, considering the best way to manage the situation while maintaining the trust of the other guards. He couldn't let them mistake him for an intruder, and yet he had to act swiftly before the figure disappeared into the palace corridors. Stepping lightly, Jameson moved closer, his senses fully alert. Every sound, the shuffle of footsteps, the rustle of clothing, the distant clatter of maintenance tools, was magnified in his awareness. The palace, usually a place of routine and order, now seemed alive with tension, every corner holding a potential surprise. He could feel the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders, even though he was officially off duty. His training had taught him that vigilance never rested, and today, that lesson was being tested. As he approached the figure, Jameson noticed something curious. The person seemed unaware of the specific layout of this section of the palace. Their movements were precise but tentative, as if they had studied general palace procedures but lacked intimate knowledge of the corridors and exits. This gave Jameson a slight advantage, and he adjusted his approach, keeping low and moving silently. He needed to identify the person before taking any action, ensuring that he could protect the palace without causing unnecessary alarm. The figure finally turned a corner, moving toward a corridor that led directly to one of the inner gates. Jameson followed, careful to remain unseen. His heart beat steadily, his breathing controlled, every muscle tuned to the task at hand. The palace, with all its grandeur and history, felt almost like a chessboard, each move critical and requiring careful thought. He knew that one wrong step could escalate the situation, yet he also knew that inaction was not an option. Suddenly, a guard appeared around the corner, speaking to a maintenance worker. The suspicious figure froze, and for a moment, panic flashed across their face. Jameson saw the tension and decided it was time to act. He stepped from the shadows with calm authority, raising his hand in a non-threatening gesture. "Stop," he said firmly. The figure turned, startled, their eyes widening in surprise. Jameson's calm demeanor, combined with the unmistakable bearing of a trained palace guard, immediately demanded attention. The figure hesitated, unsure whether to flee or comply. At that moment, the on-duty guards noticed him. Their eyes narrowed in confusion. This was a man they did not immediately recognize, standing with a quiet authority that was impossible to ignore. Whispers ran through the corridor. "Who is he? Why is he here?" Jameson's voice cut through the murmur. "I am here to ensure no harm comes to this palace," he said. His words were clear, controlled, and firm. The figure relaxed slightly, understanding that this was not an ordinary guard, but someone with experience and authority. Jameson studied them carefully, noting their movements, their posture, and the way they reacted to his presence. Every detail mattered. The on-duty guards approached cautiously, their curiosity now tempered with respect. They could see the calm confidence in Jameson's eyes, the precision in his stance, and the subtle way he commanded the space without raising his voice or using force. Even without knowing his identity, they could tell he was someone who had mastered the art of vigilance. Jameson's instincts told him that resolving the situation without confrontation was possible, but only if he acted wisely and maintained control of the narrative. The suspicious figure, realizing they had been noticed, slowly raised their hands in a gesture of compliance. Jameson nodded, signaling the guards to remain calm. He spoke in a low, controlled voice, explaining the situation as best he could without revealing classified details. The on-duty guards listened carefully, their initial confusion replaced by a mix of relief and admiration. By the time the incident was resolved, Jameson had ensured that the figure posed no immediate threat. The on-duty guards, once wary and uncertain, now viewed him with respect. The minor alarm had passed, but the experience left a lasting impression. Even in the palace, unexpected events could occur, and readiness was essential at all times. As Jameson stepped back, blending once more into the routine of the palace, he felt a mixture of relief and satisfaction. Today had reminded him of the delicate balance between vigilance and calm, authority and discretion. Even off-duty, his instincts and training had been invaluable, allowing him to act decisively when it mattered most. Jameson had barely returned to his usual patrol route when a new sense of tension began to creep over the palace corridors. He had managed the initial disturbance with the tipped cart and the suspicious figure, but the calm he had briefly felt was fading. Something was brewing that he could sense in the subtle shifts of movement among the on-duty guards. Their steps were a bit quicker, their heads turned slightly more often, and a low murmur passed between them as they exchanged glances. Jameson knew that this was the kind of atmosphere where mistakes could happen, and mistakes in a palace were never truly small. As he rounded the corner near the main hallway, he noticed a group of guards gathering near the gates of the inner courtyard. Their expressions were a mixture of curiosity, tension, and mild suspicion. Jameson recognized immediately that they were preparing for something, perhaps a confrontation, though they were unsure of what exactly awaited them. The air seemed thicker here, charged with anticipation. His instincts told him that he had to act carefully. He could not simply walk in and reveal that he was off duty. Doing so could cause confusion or even panic among the guards. Jameson observed quietly from a shadowed archway, analyzing the guards' body language. They were skilled, trained to react quickly to any threat, yet today they were tense, uncertain, and slightly off balance. It was not uncommon for routine inspections to heighten tension, but today's events, the tipped cart, the mysterious figure, had left an undercurrent of worry. Jameson knew that if he did not intervene subtly, the situation could escalate into unnecessary alarm. Then he saw it. A young guard, clearly newer to the palace, began to take a step forward, his hand reaching for the hilt of his ceremonial sword. The guard's face showed determination, but also a hint of hesitation, betraying his lack of experience. Jameson's heart rate increased slightly, not out of fear, but because he understood the delicate moment that had arrived. One wrong move, one misjudged signal, and a simple misunderstanding could turn into chaos. Deciding to act, Jameson stepped forward, moving in a way that immediately drew attention but did not appear threatening. His posture was relaxed yet authoritative, a balance he had mastered over years of service. The guard stopped mid-step, eyes widening as they noticed him. "Who goes there?" one of the senior guards called out, his voice firm but cautious. Jameson paused, hands slightly raised in a non-aggressive gesture. "I am here to ensure the safety of the palace," he said clearly. His voice carried confidence, calm, and authority, immediately capturing the attention of every guard in the corridor. The young guard hesitated, unsure whether to trust this newcomer. He exchanged a glance with a colleague who shrugged uncertainly. Jameson could see the questions in their eyes. Who was this man? How had he entered without notice? And why did he seem so confident? He knew that answering these questions required more than words. It required subtle demonstration of his knowledge, experience, and intent. Moving slowly, Jameson gestured for the guards to lower their weapons slightly. "There is no threat here," he explained, his tone calm and deliberate. "I am merely ensuring that the events of this morning do not escalate." The senior guard, a man who had served the palace for over a decade, narrowed his eyes, clearly scrutinizing Jameson. Something about the way Jameson carried himself, the steady posture, the measured steps, the quiet confidence, began to ease the tension in the corridor. Even so, suspicion lingered. One of the guards stepped forward, his voice sharp. "Explain yourself. How did you enter this area without authorization?" Jameson understood that this was not just a question of protocol, it was a test of his credibility. He responded without hesitation. "I am a trained royal guard, currently off duty. Today's earlier incident required observation and subtle intervention. My presence here is for the palace's safety." His words were straightforward, yet carried the weight of experience. The guards looked at each other, exchanging uncertain glances. The senior guard's expression softened slightly, though he remained cautious. "Off duty, you say?" he asked. "Then why act as if on duty without informing us?" Jameson chose his words carefully. "Some threats cannot wait for official authorization. Small disturbances, when left unchecked, can reveal larger weaknesses. I acted quietly to prevent panic, not to bypass your authority." His explanation was honest, precise, and respectful, qualities that demanded recognition even from those who doubted him initially. The young guard who had initially reached for his sword now lowered it, though his gaze remained wary. Jameson noticed the subtle shift in the group's demeanor. The initial tension was giving way to cautious curiosity. He understood that the palace guards, no matter how experienced, were human. They needed reassurance, guidance, and evidence that he was trustworthy. He decided to demonstrate that through small, controlled actions rather than mere words. Jameson directed his attention to the corridor where the suspicious figure had appeared earlier. He pointed out subtle signs that others might have missed: faint footprints, a slightly ajar door, and a misplaced item that suggested someone had been observing the palace routines. "These are indicators," he explained calmly, "that someone tested our response this morning. No serious threat exists now, but vigilance is required." The guards examined the details and nodded, their expressions shifting from doubt to appreciation. One of the more senior guards finally spoke, his voice measured. "You have experience, we can see that, but you must understand protocol exists for a reason. Unauthorized actions, even with good intent, can create confusion." Jameson nodded respectfully. "I understand completely," he replied. "My intention was never to undermine authority but to maintain security until proper notice could be given." His tone was sincere, leaving no room for doubt. As the conversation continued, Jameson observed the other guards more closely. He saw subtle flaws in their formation, minor hesitations in their movements, and gaps in their awareness that could be exploited by a clever intruder. But rather than criticize, he offered guidance through quiet suggestions, showing how small adjustments could improve coordination without embarrassing anyone. Slowly, the guards began to follow his lead, and the tension in the corridor eased further. Despite the growing trust, Jameson knew that today was far from over. The presence of a suspicious figure earlier had been a warning. There could be more disturbances, more tests of vigilance, and perhaps even deliberate attempts to exploit weaknesses. The palace was a complex environment, with countless corridors, rooms, and hidden areas where danger could hide. Even seasoned guards could overlook something, and Jameson had to ensure that their skills were sharpened without causing panic. As they continued walking through the corridor, Jameson explained subtle signs to watch for: unusual behavior from staff or visitors, small disturbances that could indicate something more significant, and the importance of maintaining composure under pressure. The on-duty guards listened attentively, absorbing the advice with a mix of respect and curiosity. They had faced many threats before, but Jameson's calm, measured approach reminded them that vigilance was more than brute force. It was awareness, observation, and understanding. Suddenly, a faint sound echoed from one of the side rooms, a soft rustling almost imperceptible. Jameson's senses sharpened instantly. He signaled the guards to stop and listen. The sound repeated, a quiet shift of movement. Jameson moved forward slightly, gesturing for the guards to follow at a cautious distance. The corridor seemed to shrink as tension filled the air. Every step, every shadow, and every sound mattered now. The palace, usually a place of routine, felt alive with potential danger. When they reached the side room, Jameson paused at the doorway. Inside, there was nothing dangerous, just a loose curtain moving slightly, disturbed by a draft. Yet the moment demonstrated the importance of careful observation, the need to act with precision, and the subtle balance between caution and confidence. The on-duty guards relaxed slightly, yet the lesson had been made clear. Even small, ordinary events could contain clues if one looked closely enough. By the time the morning's events had fully settled, Jameson had earned the quiet respect of the on-duty guards. They had seen his skill, his calm authority, and his ability to act decisively without causing unnecessary alarm. The tension that had filled the corridors earlier was replaced by a renewed sense of order, coordination, and awareness. Jameson knew that this day would be remembered, not just for the minor disturbances, but for the demonstration of how vigilance, experience, and calm judgment could restore confidence and security. Finally, Jameson stepped back slightly, blending once more into the routine of the palace. He had acted decisively, guided the guards, and ensured that no real threat had been overlooked. Yet, even as he moved through the corridors, he remained alert. The palace, with all its history, complexity, and hidden passages, could always present new challenges. And Jameson, even off duty, understood that his presence and readiness could make the difference between chaos and calm. The tension in the palace corridors had reached a subtle peak. Jameson had successfully navigated the earlier disturbances, guided the on-duty guards, and ensured that no immediate threats had entered the palace. Yet, even with the calm restored, a question lingered in the minds of the guards. Who was this man, moving with such authority and precision without their prior knowledge? The air was thick with curiosity and uncertainty. It was clear that Jameson could not continue remaining an unidentified figure. The confusion had to be cleared, and his true identity revealed. Jameson knew the reveal had to be handled carefully. A sudden announcement or a loud declaration could startle the guards or cause unnecessary alarm. Instead, he decided to guide them to a private section of the palace, a hallway rarely used during routine checks. The marble walls reflected the soft morning light, creating a quiet and contained space where he could speak without interruptions. As he walked, the on-duty guards followed at a cautious distance, their eyes never leaving him. They were curious, suspicious, but also strangely trusting, recognizing his calm and authoritative presence. When they reached the hallway, Jameson turned to face them fully, his posture firm but not threatening. "I need to clarify something," he began, his voice steady and even. The senior guard, arms crossed, raised an eyebrow. Go on, he said. Jameson took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. I am Jameson, a royal guard assigned to this palace. Today I am off duty, but the events of this morning required immediate attention. I acted to ensure that the palace remained secure while minimizing confusion and panic. For a moment, the guards were silent. Some of them exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from surprise to relief. The young guard who had reached for his sword earlier looked especially astonished, as though seeing a ghost he had only heard about in passing stories from senior guards. Off duty, one of them finally asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. But you moved with the precision of someone on active watch. How is that possible? Jameson smiled faintly, a mixture of humility and quiet pride. Years of training stay with a person, he replied. Even off duty, instincts and experience remain. I did not wish to alarm anyone, but when small disturbances appeared, I knew immediate attention was required. The palace must always be secure, whether or not a guard is officially on duty. His calm explanation, combined with the natural authority in his voice, began to dissolve the remaining skepticism. The senior guard stepped closer, scrutinizing Jameson's uniform and demeanor. You acted without orders, he said carefully, yet your actions prevented what could have been a larger issue. I must admit that takes courage and judgment. Jameson nodded. It is not about courage alone, he replied. It is about responsibility. Every guard must understand the importance of vigilance, and sometimes that requires action before formal orders are given. The young guard, still wide-eyed, finally spoke. I thought you were an intruder at first, he admitted, his voice shaky. You moved so quietly, so confidently, we weren't sure who you were. Jameson gave him a reassuring nod. That is understandable, he said. The palace can be confusing, especially when unfamiliar movements occur. It is normal to question what you see. What matters is how we respond, carefully, thoughtfully, and without panic. Jameson then guided their attention back to the hallway, pointing out subtle signs of the earlier disturbance. The tipped cart, the faint footprints, and the displaced items near the side gates, all had indicated a potential breach or test of the palace's security. These may appear minor, he explained, but they are important clues. Every detail matters. If ignored, even small issues can grow into larger problems. The guards studied the evidence, their expressions shifting from doubt to understanding. The young guard nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson with quiet respect. The senior guard finally broke into a small smile, his tension easing. I can see now, he said, that your actions were necessary. I misjudged the situation at first. You have earned our respect, even if we did not recognize you immediately. Jameson allowed himself a small, satisfied smile in return. It was not pride in the usual sense. He never sought recognition. But there was a quiet satisfaction in seeing the guards understand his intentions and appreciate the subtlety of his actions. To further ease the tension, Jameson decided to share a small story from his own early days as a guard, one that highlighted the importance of observation, patience, and calm judgment. He spoke of a minor disturbance in the palace years ago, one that seemed insignificant at first, but which taught him that the smallest details could reveal much about potential threats. The on-duty guards listened intently, nodding in agreement. They realized that today's events were not only a test of vigilance, but also an opportunity to learn from someone with years of experience. As Jameson spoke, he noticed the young guard standing a little straighter, his eyes more focused. The senior guards exchanged knowing glances, their confidence restored. Jameson knew that this was exactly what the palace needed, not just a resolution to the morning's incidents, but a reminder that training, attention, and teamwork were what kept the palace secure. By the time he finished speaking, the atmosphere in the hallway had transformed from confusion and suspicion to mutual respect and understanding. One of the more cautious guards finally asked, What will happen if something like this occurs again? Will you be here to intervene, even off duty? Jameson shook his head gently. Not always, he replied. Every guard has a responsibility to act when necessary, whether on or off duty. My presence today was fortunate, but the palace relies on each of you every day to remain alert and vigilant. Remember, it is not the uniform or orders alone that ensure safety. It is the combination of skill, awareness, and teamwork. The guards nodded, absorbing the lesson. Even the young guards seemed to have gained confidence, understanding that vigilance was not only about fear or caution, but also about thoughtful action and clear-headed judgment. Jameson could see that the experience of this morning would remain with them for a long time, shaping how they approached their duties and interactions within the palace. As they began to move back toward the main courtyard, Jameson remained slightly behind, observing the guards as they resumed their routine patrols. There was a renewed sense of order, a careful rhythm that had returned after the disruption. The guards moved with purpose, yet with an awareness that their actions mattered not just in the moment, but for the overall security of the palace. Jameson felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that he had not only resolved the situation, but had also reinforced the importance of calm, decisive action. Even as the palace returned to its usual hum of activity, Jameson's thoughts lingered on the lessons of the morning. He realized that leadership and respect were earned not through authority alone, but through calm guidance, thoughtful decisions, and the ability to act decisively when circumstances demanded it. The on-duty guards had learned this lesson firsthand, and he knew that their growth would strengthen the palace's security for years to come. Before leaving the hallway, Jameson offered a few final words. "Remember," he said quietly, "every small detail matters. Every action you take can make a difference. Be vigilant, be thoughtful, and always support one another." Today was a reminder that even the smallest events can teach us valuable lessons. The guards nodded, silently acknowledging the wisdom in his words. The young guard smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and admiration shining in his eyes. As Jameson prepared to step away, the senior guard approached him one last time. "Jameson," he said, "we owe you our thanks. Not just for your actions, but for the guidance and example you have provided. It is rare to find someone who can act with such precision and calm, even under unexpected circumstances." Jameson inclined his head respectfully. "Thank you," he replied. "It is my duty and one I take seriously. But remember, the strength of this palace lies in each of you. Every guard, every staff member plays a part in keeping it safe." With that, Jameson stepped back, allowing the guards to return fully to their duties. The palace seemed quieter now, yet more alert, more prepared. The confusion of the morning had passed, replaced by understanding, respect, and a renewed sense of purpose. Jameson, though off duty, had reminded everyone that vigilance was not simply a task. It was a mindset, a commitment to observation, patience, and careful action. As he moved toward the palace gates, Jameson felt a quiet pride, not in recognition, but in the knowledge that the palace was secure, that the on-duty guards had learned valuable lessons, and that his presence, however brief, had made a meaningful difference. He walked with calm assurance, blending into the routine, yet leaving a lasting impression on the minds of those he had guided. The events of the morning would be remembered, not as a threat or disturbance, but as a demonstration of quiet skill, authority, and respect. Jameson knew that he would continue to serve, whether on duty or off, guided by the principles of vigilance, careful observation, and thoughtful action. And the palace, with all its history and importance, would remain safe, strengthened by the lessons of a single, decisive day. The palace had finally returned to its usual rhythm. The corridors buzzed quietly with routine activity, guards patrolling with steady steps, servants moving trays of food and drink, and the soft murmur of staff attending to their daily tasks. Yet, even amid the familiar sounds of daily life, there was a subtle difference in the atmosphere. A sense of quiet confidence had settled over the palace. The guards, having experienced the events of the morning, moved with a renewed sense of purpose and attention. They were more aware, more alert, and more connected to one another. Jameson, now back in the shadows of his off-duty role, observed the change with a quiet satisfaction. He walked slowly through the main hall, allowing himself a moment to reflect on the day's events. The morning's disturbances, the tipped cart, the mysterious figure, the tense confrontation with the on-duty guards, had tested his skills, patience, and judgment. Yet it had also reminded him why he had chosen this path. Being a royal guard was not simply about standing at attention or following orders. It was about vigilance, judgment, and responsibility. It was about ensuring that everyone within the palace could go about their lives safely, without fear or disruption. Jameson paused near a large window, looking out over the palace gardens. The sun was now higher in the sky, casting warm light across the manicured lawns and vibrant flower beds. He thought about the city beyond the palace walls, the bustling streets, the market where he had walked earlier, the children playing with the stray cat, and the shopkeepers calling out their greetings. It struck him how different life was outside the palace compared to inside. Yet both spaces were connected, and his role was to ensure that connection remained safe and unharmed. As he turned away from the window, he noticed the on-duty guards moving past. Their expressions were calm but purposeful, their steps coordinated and confident. The senior guard, who had questioned his presence earlier, offered a small nod in Jameson's direction, a silent acknowledgement of respect and understanding. Jameson returned the gesture, appreciating the unspoken communication between colleagues who had shared an unusual and important experience. The young guard, who had been uncertain and anxious earlier, now walked with a steady rhythm, his eyes alert and aware. Jameson felt a sense of quiet pride in knowing that his presence and guidance had contributed to their growth. He continued through the palace, observing the daily routines with renewed perspective. The staff moved efficiently, carrying out their responsibilities with precision and care. Even the small moments, the polishing of a brass railing, the careful arrangement of flowers in a vase, the soft laughter of servants exchanging stories, felt significant. These were the moments that made the palace more than just walls and corridors. They were the moments that made it a home, a center of life and history, and a place worth protecting. As Jameson passed the training yard, he saw a group of new recruits practicing their drills under the watchful eyes of the senior guards. Their movements were stiff and deliberate, lacking the fluid confidence of experienced guards. Yet there was determination in their eyes, and Jameson knew that time and guidance would shape them into skilled protectors of the palace. He paused to watch for a few moments, reflecting on his own early days as a recruit, the mistakes he had made, the lessons he had learned, and the mentors who had guided him. It reminded him that growth often came through experience, patience, and the willingness to act wisely when faced with challenges. A faint smile crossed Jameson's face as he continued walking. Today had been an unusual day, but it had also been instructive. The morning's incidents had tested not only his own abilities, but also the readiness and cohesion of the on-duty guards. By remaining calm, observant, and deliberate, he had been able to guide them through the uncertainty, helping them regain confidence and strengthen their skills. He thought about the subtle ways in which leadership worked, not through force alone, but through example, clarity, and thoughtful action. As he walked past the inner courtyard, he noticed the young guard from earlier practicing alone, reviewing the steps Jameson had suggested for heightened vigilance. The guard's movements were careful, precise, and deliberate. Jameson approached silently, watching for a moment before speaking softly. "You're improving," he said, his voice calm but encouraging. The young guard jumped slightly, then smiled, a mixture of pride and relief on his face. "Thank you, sir," he replied. I didn't realize how much I could learn in such a short time." Jameson nodded. "Small lessons, when remembered, make the greatest difference," he said. "Always observe, always think, and always support one another. That is what keeps this palace secure." The young guard bowed slightly and resumed his practice, his confidence noticeably higher than before. Jameson continued walking, feeling the subtle satisfaction of having influenced the day in a positive way. Even off duty, he realized, his responsibility to the palace and its people never truly ended. Every observation, every action, every careful decision contributed to the larger mission of protection and care. It was a responsibility he bore willingly and with quiet pride. Later in the day, Jameson made his way to the palace gates, where the senior guard waited. They exchanged a few words about the morning's events, reflecting on the lessons learned and the importance of remaining calm under pressure. The senior guard's tone was one of respect and understanding. "You handled the situation well," he said. "Your presence reminded us all that even the smallest details matter, and that calm, decisive action can prevent confusion and fear." Jameson nodded respectfully. "It is everyone's responsibility," he replied. "Today's events are a reminder that teamwork, vigilance, and observation are more important than individual recognition." As Jameson prepared to step outside the gates, he looked back at the palace one last time. The walls, the corridors, the gardens, and the people within, all of it felt alive with history, purpose, and life. He thought about the lessons of the day, the importance of observation, the value of calm authority, and the quiet satisfaction of helping others learn and grow. He realized that these lessons extended beyond the palace walls into the world outside, where ordinary moments carried their own significance and required their own vigilance. The streets outside were bustling, as they had been in the morning. Children played and laughed, vendors called out their greetings, and the city continued its daily rhythm. Jameson walked slowly, taking in the familiar sights and sounds with a sense of calm satisfaction. He knew that the palace was secure, that the on-duty guards had grown stronger and more confident, and that his brief presence had made a meaningful difference. Yet he also understood that his role was ongoing, that vigilance was a continuous effort, and that every day brought its own challenges and lessons. As he moved further from the palace, he noticed familiar faces from the market, the baker, the street performers, the shopkeepers. Each greeted him with a nod or a smile, unaware of the events that had unfolded within the palace walls. Jameson allowed himself a small smile in return, appreciating the simple joys and ordinary connections that made life outside the palace meaningful. Even as a royal guard, he cherished these moments of normalcy, understanding that protection was not only about walls and gates, but also about allowing everyday life to continue safely and peacefully. By late afternoon, Jameson found a quiet spot in the city to rest for a few moments. He reflected on the day's events, the lessons learned, and the subtle ways in which he had influenced the outcome. He thought about the young guard who had gained confidence, the senior guards who had recognized the value of calm, decisive action, and the palace itself, standing strong and secure. He understood that true strength came from preparation, awareness, and the ability to act thoughtfully under pressure. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the city streets, Jameson rose and began the walk back toward the palace. Though his day off had been filled with unexpected challenges, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The palace was safe, the guards were wiser and more confident, and he had reaffirmed the importance of vigilance, patience, and guidance. He knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but he also knew that today's experiences had prepared him, and those around him, for whatever might come. Arriving at the palace gates once more, Jameson paused and looked back at the walls, the courtyards, and the bustling activity within. He felt a quiet pride in the role he had played and in the palace's continued safety. The events of the day had been unusual, even dramatic, but they had also strengthened the bonds between guards, reinforced the importance of observation, and demonstrated the value of calm, decisive leadership. He understood that these lessons would linger, shaping the way the palace and its protectors faced the days ahead. Finally, Jameson stepped through the gates, blending once more into the rhythm of palace life. He walked with calm assurance, his mind at ease, yet ever alert to the subtle signs of movement and activity around him. The palace, with its history, responsibility, and life within its walls, would remain safe as long as vigilance, teamwork, and thoughtful action guided those who served within it. And Jameson, whether on duty or off, knew that his presence, quiet guidance, and dedication had made a lasting difference. As evening settled over the palace, Jameson found a quiet spot in the garden. The soft glow of lanterns illuminated the flower beds, the gentle rustle of leaves filled the air, and the distant city hummed with life. He allowed himself a moment of rest, reflecting on the day, the lessons learned, and the subtle but meaningful ways he had contributed to the palace's security. The sense of pride was quiet but deep, a reminder that vigilance, courage, and thoughtful action were always worth the effort. And with that, Jameson felt a calm satisfaction settle over him. The palace was safe. The guards were stronger. The day, though unusual, had reinforced the values that defined their service: observation, patience, teamwork, and careful action. He knew that life would continue, challenges would arise, and vigilance would always be necessary. But for now he could rest, content in the knowledge that he had acted with skill, judgment, and quiet courage, and that the palace, with all its history and life, remained secure.